In the 1990s, Japanese sports cars experienced a golden age, to the point that they were capable of putting the Ferrari supercars of the time to shame. 25 years ago, the terror of Ferrari and Porsche was not the McLaren or the Mercedes-AMG. Back then, many of the most desirable sports cars on the planet had Japanese passports and sported Honda, Mazda, Mitsubishi, Nissan, and Toyota badges. In the early 1990s, Japanese brands began to carve out a niche for themselves in the European market with attractive, technologically advanced vehicles that also offered above-average reliability. In a very short time, they put on sale in the old continent their best sports cars that, at that time, offered a performance similar, and sometimes superior, to that of the untouchable Porsche and Ferrari. In fact, legend has it that Luca Cordero di Montezemolo, Ferrari's president at the time, defined the 348, manufactured between 1989 and 1994, as a shitty car when compared to its Eastern competitors. At that time, they incorporated technologies that the Italian brand's models could only dream of, such as four-wheel steering, active aerodynamic elements, rotary engines, adaptive suspensions, and they also had a much lower price. Mitsubishi 3000 GT. We don't know what exactly Mitsubishi was thinking when they decided to create a sports car and call it a GTO. Maybe to piss off someone at Ferrari. That's how this model was named in Japan and the UK. However, outside these countries, the model was marketed as 3000 GT. The brand feared that purists would repudiate the sports car, thinking that it was trying to capitalize on the commercial pull of classics like the Pontiac GTO or the Ferrari 250 GTO. This supercar, born in 1990, used a powerful twin-turbo 3-liter V6 engine with twin overhead camshafts, 24 valves, and 300 horsepower, which increased to 320 horsepower from 1994. But, in addition, this car had front and all-wheel drive versions, as well as an uncommon level of technology. Among its most outstanding features was a four-wheel steering system. At over 50 kilometers per hour or 31 miles per hour, the rear axle tires rotated in the same direction as the front tires to improve stability. There was also an electronically controlled, limited-slip rear differential and adaptive suspension. A separate mention deserves the active aerodynamic system, consisting of a front splitter and rear splitter, which could change their position to improve aerodynamic support at high speed. Nissan 300ZX. The fourth generation of Nissan Z chassis, the 300ZX Z32, was an extremely ambitious vehicle for the brand, very successful at the time. When it was time to present the fourth generation, Nissan wanted to return to the essence of a pure sports car, but without abandoning the sophistication that had been achieved over time. The bodywork that covered all this was a masterpiece of flowing designs and aerodynamics. The goal was stratospheric, for the new Z to be the best sports car in the world. It doesn't exhibit as high a level of technology as the 3000 GT, but that doesn't mean it wasn't a tremendously fun to drive model. In fact, this Japanese sports car is remembered as synonymous with driving fun. An enormous effort was poured into its development. The platform was completely new, 35% stiffer than its predecessor, the Z31. Under the hood, it was equipped with a 3.0 twin-turbo engine of 300 horsepower and rear-wheel drive. At that time, this Nissan incorporated multi-link suspension on both axles, as well as the super high-capacity actively controlled suspension, active rear steering system. Mazda RX7. The Mazda RX7 is a legendary classic among Japanese sports cars, which lived its best moment with the appearance of its third and last generation in 1992. With this last generation, it was the ultimate exponent of sportiness. Light, powerful, and very agile. It is true that with 240 horsepower, or 276 in its latest evolution, it is less powerful than the Nissan 300ZX or the Mitsubishi 3000 GT. However, it has an ace up its sleeve. A rotary engine 1.3 liters supercharged by two Hitachi turbochargers. Where several brands did not trust, Mazda engineers continued with their developments until they got the rotary engine devised by Felix Wankel to work properly. Not only did they make it work reliably, but also that it was a winner, as it made clear when it was the engine of the first Japanese car to achieve absolute victory in the 24 Hours of Le Mans. It was a thoroughbred sports car that was a dynamism to fall in love with. With the rabid engine, a hair-raising sound, the third generation of the RX7 was one of the most exotic sports cars on the market at that time. Toyota Supra. In 1993, the fourth generation Supra arrived with supercar aspirations. It debuted with a design composed of curves and characterized by an imposing rear spoiler. Most fans remember the Supra A80 for the 2JZ GTE engine, a 330 horsepower 3.0-liter twin-turbo inline six-cylinder that in Japan did not exceed 276 horsepower, at least on paper, and the 0 to 100 kilometers per hour or 60 miles per hour was covered in 5 seconds. And that car was rather heavy for the time, 1,630 kilograms, or 3,600 pounds. The reality is that all the Supra's fame comes from its engine, or rather, the preparations that were made with that block as a base. Its 2JZ GTE and 6-speed manual transmission lent itself without complaint to all kinds of preparations. It was the ideal base for all preparers of the planet and had the possibility of getting huge powers. Some examples range from HKS to Blitz through Smokey Nagata and practically anyone who dared to reinforce the moving parts of the block before increasing the blowing pressure of the turbos or simply installing turbos the size of a pumpkin. Japanese tuners were able to extract up to 700 horsepower without touching the engine block. And with extensive preparations, 800 to 1000 horsepower could be extracted. The Supra was then more famous for its stunts and versatility in the field of preparations. But it never ceased to be an excellent sports car. Honda NSX. For many, the Honda NSX is the king of Japanese sports cars of the era. Partly because Ayrton Senna collaborated in its tuning, and partly because of its spectacular performance. In fact, the goal of Honda's engineers was to achieve the most favorable power-to-weight ratio possible, to surpass the performance of the Ferrari 348 and Porsche 911. The result was a supercar with an aluminum chassis, where the suspension arms were also made of this material, which, in addition to achieving an almost perfect weight distribution, kept the weight-to-power ratio below 5.2 kilograms to horsepower or 11.5 pounds to horsepower. But at that time, working with aluminum was an ordeal for automakers, as it was less rigid than traditional steel. So, to design the parts and the amount of material needed at each point of the car, Honda turned to the supercomputer called Crazy. The result was a chassis weighing only 208 kilograms, which was among the stiffest of its time. As far as the engine was concerned, it was the only model on the list to incorporate a naturally aspirated engine. Although, thanks to the VTEC variable valve timing system, it partly compensated for the lack of turbocharger. It was a 3.0 V6 engine in central position which developed 270 horsepower. And was capable of taking the Honda NSX from 0 to 100 kilometers per hour in just over 5 seconds.